Hello, and welcome to My Bahá'í Life, the podcast where we dive into the life stories of Baha'is from all walks of life. Each episode brings you personal journeys, milestones, unique challenges, and the perspectives that have shaped their lives and interactions with others. From involvement in community building efforts to meaningful conversations that inspire resilience, our guests share how they navigate hardships while staying committed to a vision of unity, peace, and justice. So sit back, relax, and join us as we explore these incredible journeys toward a united world. Today, we would like to introduce Jacki Oswald from Richardson, Texas. Welcome, Jacki. Please go ahead.
I was born and raised in the Midwest, in central western Illinois, along the Mississippi River. And I was born in 1938, and my parents we all had gone to a one-room country schoolhouse. My mother's father, my mother and dad, my sister and I, all over the years went to a one-room country school. Anyway, Mom and Dad met at the elementary school, married, and during their life, they were attending a community church, a Christian church there. And one of the family members of one of the families had relatives up in Chicago who wanted her to come up and help with their children, which she did. While she was there in Chicago helping her niece and nephew, she took them to a park and while watching them, sat on a park bench with a woman who introduced her to the Baha'i faith back in the mid-30s. And she was very immediately intrigued and very quickly became a Baha'i, attended a lot of firesides up in Chicago in the 30s. Later, she had to come home to help take care of her mother. And when she did, she went to the church of her earlier life and told everybody about the Baha'i faith. And at some point, she had introduced it to her brother, who was a born-again Christian, my mother and father, and another person, Lois Coe, who was a piano teacher. So they were studying the Baha'i faith. They studied the Baha'i faith for, I believe Mother said, 2 years. They would meet every week and study the faith together. And Mother said she felt like she needed to know everything about the Baha'i faith before she could become a Baha'i. And she finally did, and Dad did 6 months later. They became Baha'is in this farming community in central western Illinois in the first 100 years of the Baha'i faith. To me, that was very special because they didn't go searching. It came to them. So as children, we went to Baha'i children's classes there that was taught. Now, the children's class materials amounted to whatever somebody could think up. So it was interesting. There was always a close relationship during my early childhood with the Black community. And so we would have picnics together. We'd go swimming in creeks. You don't go to the swimming pools. And anyway, we would meet many of the people who lived in Quincy there. And so my relationship with the Black community began when I was a baby, really. And it makes it very easy for me to feel relaxed around this community. In fact, longing for it, living in a community that's basically a white community with some Asian members. During this time, the House of Worship was being built in Wilmette, outside of Chicago. And in the late 40s, Mother and Dad would attend the convention there. They would go up and attend the convention, not as delegates, but just as guests. And so we grew up the convention would be held in the basement of the house of worship. So we grew up around other Baha'is, and it was very interesting to see people from different nationalities and backgrounds together in a very loving, unified atmosphere. We were able to attend the dedication of the house of worship in 1953. Ruhia Khanum was there. Many hands of the cause were there. And it was a special occasion. And Ruhia Khanum, I remember especially, she was standing at one of the entrances to the upper part of the house of worship, anointing everybody, man, woman, youth, children, with the rose water from the World Center. During this time, the Baha'is were very active in sharing the faith with other people and in having social things, picnics, celebrating Race Unity Day religiously each summer, and various activities such as this. Also attending the unit conventions in the southern part of Illinois, because Chicago area had a separate unit convention, and everything from Chicago south was a part of one unit. And so we would travel around Illinois, the various places, and meet Baha'is scattered in those areas. During the time of the late 50s, I was in college. My sister had already graduated from college and was teaching school. And I was working in the kitchen where everybody worked there. So got a call from my mother, and she said that Shoghi Effendi had just died. And we were, it didn't mean a whole lot to me. I knew who Shoghi Effendi was. I'd read his writings. In fact, in order to become a Baha'i back at that time, you had to have studied 4 things. You had to have read the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, Baha'u'llah in the New Era, the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah, and then there was Covenant and Administration. You had to read that, and then you had to ask for permission to become a Baha'i. And since there were no local spiritual assemblies in that part of the state, we wrote a letter directly to the national body and were accepted in that way. There were not a lot of Baha'is in our area at all, in the county where we lived in. But we certainly got a view of the world perspective of the Baha'i faith by attending the national conventions and seeing people from all over the world that were there, including many people from the United States, of course. So during that time, then after Shoghi Effendi's death, there was a big push to fulfill the goals of the 10-year World Crusade. And that was accomplished. It was accomplished in what was left to have done before the election of the Universal House of Justice, which was in 1963 in London, England. Talking about the children's classes, Lois Coe had been a teacher of some kind, I'm not quite sure what, and whether it was a piano or whatever. And Marie Fingerlin was the person from the church that had initially heard of the Baha'i faith in the Chicago area. And when she came back, she played a violin, and she would play the violin, and Lois would play the piano, and we would always sing and have prayers before getting together. And then Marie, when she was there, would have little lessons, and she might have taken a piece of paper and found some pictures from magazines that she would glue onto the paper, and she would put a Baha'i quote next to it, or we'd just talk about the picture and the different things that were in it, and relationships and qualities. And so it was very simple. There was just my sister and I initially, and then some of the tenant farmers' children, a couple of them, were invited to come and join the classes, and they were young or younger than we were, and so they came over across the field to the classes on Sundays, and later on their parents became Baha'is. There were no other Baha'is other than those 4 people in that area for several years. Later on, in the during college, I met my future husband, and he was from a Lutheran background, and he told me, he said, "I have my own religion," he says, "but nobody else is a part of it." I said, "Okay." So of course, I told him about the Baha'i faith beforehand, and we had discussions about how this would affect our life as a family. So we met in college, and I was majoring in biology, and he was majoring in math and economics. And anyway, during college, we decided to get married. We were married in between semesters of my senior year, and then he had another year to go. So I was teaching high school biology at that time. When he got out of college, it was during the Vietnam War, and he was received whatever you receive as a young man to come into the military and to fight in Vietnam. And I said, "Oh, I really don't want you to be in the military." I said, "If you teach, you get a deferment." So he considered that, and the way circumstances ended up, he ended up being hired as a elementary school teacher in a Catholic school very near where we lived. He was the only man and the only non-Catholic teaching there, with 50 students in his classroom. After teaching, he went to an employment fair, a work fair, where you go to find a job. And he had 7 offers, and we chose an offer in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, because it was between his folks up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and my folks down in the Quincy area. And so he learned software programming, and we had started our family by then. We had a girl and a boy, and a second boy. And so we moved up to Cedar Rapids, and we're there for about a year when Mr. Collins, the owner of the company, decided to move a whole group of 30 people down to his facilities down here in the Dallas, Texas area. So that's how we got to Richardson, Texas. We were moved down here with 3 young children, rented a house for a year, and then added another child, a baby girl, to our family, and found the house that we are living in now. He really enjoyed the work that he did. We stayed in Richardson because that was closest to his work. Some of the Baha'is in University Park said, "Oh, come live in University Park. We need more people for our assembly." I said, "No way." No way. Traveling every day. So there was one other Baha'i in Richardson at that time, and we would, get together and have prayers. And there were Baha'is there was a Baha'i family in Garland, and so we began to get settled in as Baha'is. We moved here in August, and the first unit convention was in September or October. I guess it was October. And the first one that we went to was in downtown Dallas. And this was for East Texas. The next year, the unit convention was in Austin. So the family went down there for that. Then one of the times was out in far East Texas near Marshall. Now, some of the folks nowadays don't like to go to the unit conventions because they're so far away. And I think, far away? Because there were fewer Baha'is, we were more desperate to see other Baha'is, to meet other Baha'is. So we gladly went to these other more distant places. And now, because the faith has grown to the extent that it is now, the unit conventions are much closer. So we have that bounty. But going back to the children, there was another family, Baha'i family in Garland, Texas at the time, and we had 4 children in our family, and they had, I believe, 5 children. And so we would go over there to Garland in their house, and Carrie was the baby, and she was still in a pumpkin seat, and I would sit her down on a desk or something while I would help teach a class, and Bob would help teach a class, and the 2 families got together. And then there was a family from University Park that they had 3 children, and so they joined us there in Garland. Later, it was moved to Richardson, and by this time, there were a few Persian families that were moving to the area. So we had each room of our house almost had a different class in it. Bob was a teacher, I was a teacher, 2 other people were teachers, and some of the parents that brought the children, they'd sit and on the back porch or in the living room and visit. So it was a beginning. And then we would move the classes the next year to University Park. And then Irving would join us, and then Mesquite would join us, and these were just single families that were there. And so each year we'd move to a different area. And that's how these children's classes began. There was also the Oklahoma-Texas Baha'i School, which was being rented, at this time was being rented up in Bridgeport. So we would have summer school and a winter school at Bridgeport Baha'i Camp there. And that developed for quite a while. But in the early 70s, the Universal House of Justice was guiding, overseeing the worldwide Baha'i community. And in some parts of the world, there were hundreds of people that were becoming Baha'is in Vietnam and in Africa and different places throughout the world. And this was done by direct teaching. Now, as I mentioned before, in order to become a Baha'i, my sister and I, raised in a Baha'i family, had to study 4 different things and then write a note or a letter. There was not a card to sign, and ask permission to join the faith. Now, this direct teaching thing was really something new and very troubling to many people because, well, you go out and you talk to people and you let them know about the Baha'i faith, and maybe 15 minutes or an hour later, they could become Baha'is. What was this all about? And we were educated to find out that we had the responsibility of sharing the Baha'i faith with those people that were interested in hearing more. And it was our responsibility to share the important parts of the faith and ask them, if they were interested, if they would be interested in joining this. And many people did. And this was a real test for the American Baha'is. And so my husband and I both felt that we were being guided. By this time, my husband had become a Baha'i. He became a Baha'i before our first child was born. So anyway, he'd become a Baha'i years before that. And so we would take turns. One of us would stay home with the kids and the other one would go to whatever teaching gathering was going on, and then would be dispersed to go out. I think the first area that I was sent to with a Baha'i friend was out to Rowlett. And this friend said, well, how do you feel about this? I said, well, I just hope and pray that God will give me the words once I knock on the door. So anyway, so Baha'i scattered in the Dallas area. We scattered all out from Arlington, from Fort Worth, from Dallas, and went to these smaller towns, and then would go back, because once people became Baha'is, it's just a little nibble as to what they know. So it's our responsibility to go out and to tell them more, to consolidate and to deepen them. And so in this process, Bob and I would take turns. He would go with another family that was living in Richardson that were very involved in the teaching, and they would go out to Rowlett, Rockwall, and Royce City in one evening. And they would go and visit the people whose names they had and talk to them briefly about, some aspect of the Baha'i faith, maybe for 45 minutes, and then you'd go on to Rockwall, and you'd do the same, and then you'd go on to Royce City and walk down the neighborhood, because it was usually in the neighborhoods where the teaching had been done. And Bob Hopkins and I went to Plano, and there had been no Baha'is in Plano at that time. And so we were on the main part of Plano on on the east side of 75, in a black neighborhood. And he and I would go and knock on the doors and meet with the people that had signed or that had said they wanted to be Baha'is, and we'd visit with them. And we would go from one place to another. And then periodically we would set up a picnic and have a picnic in one of the parks here in Plano, and would go to the neighborhood and pick up the people that were interested in coming and have a picnic together with Baha'is that came from University Park and Dallas and different areas. The faith, Richardson was very involved in all the direct teaching and in the consolidation. And we moved from Plano, we went up to McKinney. Many people, there was just a couple Baha'i families that moved up there, and they were working on consolidating. And then we went up to Sherman and Denison. Sherman there wasn't much luck with, but Denison there was a couple of families, Baha'i families, that were up there. And so Richardson was involved with this whole row of communities in the North Texas area. And other Baha'is, say from Arlington or from Fort Worth, they would go down to Italy, Midlothian, Mansfield. So people were scattered all over. And this initial bare bones of introducing people to the faith, we were working very hard at consolidating and deepening these people. Going back to the development of some of the communities around Dallas, Plano was one. As I mentioned earlier, there were no Baha'is that we were aware of, except the ones that came in to the faith through the direct teaching efforts. And then some of the Persian Baha'is came, and of course the development of the children's classes came much more quickly, with many more Persian children around. And again, the children's classes, the children would come from many different communities in order to take part in the classes. And getting teachers, it used to be that if you wanted your kids in a children's class, you became a teacher. Whether you were the teacher or not, you became a teacher. With the larger children's class here became the habit of parents would come, drop their kids off, go someplace else, and let somebody else be the teacher of the developing and enlarging children's classes. So these are all part of the evolution of a community. Then, as the consolidation developed, this was all over the world where it was having to be developed. And there would be efforts. The House of Justice was encouraging people, encouraging communities to concentrate on particular minority communities that happened to be in their area and to work with teaching them and developing materials for them. As the Baha'i community was developing, Arlington became bigger, Grand Prairie started to get bigger, Euless, Irving, all of these. But there were just a few Baha'is in each of these. And so when holy days and Nowruz would come, you didn't have enough people in your community. So we would go wherever. Okay, one of these communities would host Nowruz. Somebody else in Mansfield would host a Yamaha. And so we would move all over. So we got to know Baha'is in a lot of these different communities that were initially there. And that was, again, a part of this evolution of the communities, and a very important part. Choosing a minority in Richardson to focus on, our main minority in Richardson were the Chinese. And a lot of Chinese from both Taiwan and mainland Chinese were going to University of Texas at Dallas. And there were also other Chinese that had moved here, and there became Little Chinatown over on Greenville, north of Beltline. And they came because of the schools. The schools were good. And then as this aged, Plano schools were more of an attraction, so a lot of the Chinese moved north to Plano to take advantage of the Plano schools. But in Richardson, we had the Chinese students. And these, we just did cold turkey. I'd call the Office of Student Activities up there and do a cold call and tell them who I was and that I was a member of the Baha'i faith. And we would like to get to know some of the Chinese and would like to invite them to our homes. And could they give me somebody to contact with the Chinese club? There were two clubs. There was the Taiwanese club and there was the mainland Chinese club. And so I got names. And so the first group came were from Taiwan, the chairperson of their club, and about 3 or 4 others. They came and we just visited. Bob and I, we said we wanted to be their home away from home because we knew that home meant a lot to the Chinese. So I guess we passed the test enough that they would invite more. And I think the Taiwanese had talked to some of the mainland Chinese, and they began coming. So we would get together once a month, and, we just invited them, and we would talk about different things. I'd show them through the house and show them the different areas of the house where you do your laundry, and the bedrooms and all this kind of thing, because I was sure that they had no idea what an American house looked like. And so then we began having monthly kind of potlucks. And the Chinese would teach us how to do dumplings. And so, we would make some extra food, and then they would bring the wrappings and the different things, and we would all make dumplings, and be visiting, and they'd be learning more English because most of the Chinese were involved in the computer programs. And basically that was where they were together, of the Taiwanese and mainland Chinese. They said they did not intermingle with the the Taiwanese with the mainland or the mainland with the Taiwanese, except in our home. And so we were very happy and pleased with that. Then we got to the point where we would invite them over for another once a month to a talking area where we would choose a topic, such as family. And they would come and they would share what family was like in China. And we would share what family was like in America. And then we would talk about the ideal family as seen through the Baha'i teachings. And then we would pick education, schools, and we would do the same thing and learn about this. And the equality of men and women, that was always a thing because the women were not treated equally at all in China. So, and then we talked about medicine, and that was so funny because we had some of our Persian Baha'is that were a part of this. And you could just see that old Silk Road working because whatever they were having in China to do with colds or whatever, they had black ball tea, I think it was, that we got fed when we had colds when we were there. And sure enough, the Baha'is from Iran, they had the similar things. So it was educational and it was funny also. So that was wonderful. About the same time in the early 90s, there was the beginnings of the Ruhi Training Institute that was had been going on for some time in Colombia in South America. And it was the Universal House of Justice encouraged people in America, and I'm sure other places in the world, to study the Ruhi materials. And so since the House of Justice asked us to do it, well, we did it. And the first time I took Ruhi Book 1 was up at Bridgeport at a Baha'i school. And I took it, and I don't remember who the tutor was. And I thought, this is really strange. It's really very, very basic and what have you. So then we took it back here in Richardson. Somebody came, and some more people here took it. And I thought, what is the point of all this? But the House of Justice wanted us to do it, so okay, I'll do it. And then they started having training in Arising to Serve, Book 2. And they had trainings down in the Woodlands. And so a carload of us went down to the Woodlands. And we slept 6 and 8 people in a bedroom. And the women were in a couple of the bedrooms, and men were in another bedroom of the owners of the house. And we'd get together during the day, and part of the people were taking the classes, and part of the people were assigned to be the cooks they'd have to go out and buy groceries for the day, and then they'd cook the various things. So as we were doing this, I was sitting here trying to learn this stuff, and I was watching people that had been Baha'is for decades. And some of them were sitting around and really getting excited and just thinking this was so wonderful. And I thought, well, Jackie, what are you missing with this? So I began thinking more seriously. Finally, I caught on we were the Baha'is that had to learn this material in order to teach other people who had just become Baha'is or were new Baha'is, or they weren't Baha'is at all. You just wanted to introduce them to the faith. And we were trying to get more human resources in teaching children's classes, in doing the different activities that a community has to do, especially as it grows. And that's how it grows, is through this. So I finally caught on and switched over from my looking down my nose at the materials to taking part in them wholeheartedly. So now I understand, I think, I've only seen up to 13, but I think there might be a book 14 or 15. I'm not really sure. But all of them had an activity until it got to book 8 and book 9. I said, well, what's the activity? Well, that got into, the covenant and all of that got into the material that I had to learn before I ever became a Baha'i, all this other stuff, and we didn't. So, we got this, we evolved and saw how the House of Justice, in their wisdom, could see that where there were 20 Baha'is in Colombia and they had 10,000 people registered on there, what they had to do in order to gain more human resources to take over these responsibilities, to see the far distant vision that the House of Justice had. In 1992, there was a Baha'i World Congress, and initially it was going to be in Baghdad. But of course, with world conditions the way they were, it couldn't be there, and it was switched to the New York City. And so there were 2 different sessions. There was a morning session and an afternoon session. I don't recall how many people, 10,000. I don't recall how many Baha'is that were there, but there were a lot. And so that was a very exciting development. My husband couldn't go because by this time he had developed multiple sclerosis and he would not be able to be in crowds and be juggled around, and just too much going on. So I tried to share with him as much as I could of what I had experienced. And there was one, I think at a Hilton hotel, there was Aborigine, I think, from Australia, big, tall people. And their bodies were all like powder, white powder all over them. And they were in this room singing and dancing. And one of the Baha'is told me he was at the back leaning on the doorknob. And he said somebody from the hotel came and said, the Hilton has never seen anything like this. So anyway, it was quite an experience for not only the Baha'is, but for the people in Thanksgiving weekend in New York City, to have all these Baha'is wandering around and all the music and everything that was going on. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Prior to that Congress, the Baha'is in Richardson had been working with the Chinese at UTD, both mainland Chinese and those from Taiwan. And so we were encouraged by some travel teachers to go to China. And I was able to find a friend, a Baha'i that I had met but had never really gotten to know, Banu Kamlosi. And she'd always wanted to go to China. So the 2 of us left in January of 1993 to go to China, and stopped in Hong Kong, then went to Macau, and went through some training there so that we could learn the things that you should not do and people that it's fine to associate with, and some of the customs of Chinese that are different from what we know in the United States. So we were there from the end of January, right after Chinese New Year, until into the end of April. And while we were there, we paid American dollars, and we took 5 different courses. We took Chinese language, which we just barely got to know because it's a tonal language, and if you don't have the tones, you don't have the word. So we took the Chinese language, we took history and social studies, we took art, painting, watercolor, calligraphy, and wushu, the martial arts. Very simple. It was very nice. We had a translator, of course, because most of our teachers were Chinese-speaking only, and so these students translated for us. After China, we traveled from China to Singapore, and from Singapore to Delhi in India, because my husband wanted me to be sure and see the house of worship there. And then from there, we went on around the world to Frankfurt in Germany and to Zurich, I think it was, in Switzerland in order to get to London. And then we were in London for about 5 days or so. We went to a feast. We went to Shoghi Effendi's grave and then came home. So that was a wonderful trip. We managed to go again in October of 1994. My friend Banu had, during the 10-year World Crusade, had lived and worked in Thailand and Laos. And but she always wanted to go to China, so this was a good opportunity. So 94 and 95, we went back and were there in China till the end of January, and then I came home. And in the year 2003, there was a Liang Crazy English school. He had developed this school, very profitable school, where it was strictly vocal. Lots of Chinese know English, but they know the reading part, and the words and everything are a different challenge. So we were there with about 30 other American-speaking English, and just went into the different classes that we were assigned to and would answer questions or just talk to the students in that. We were there for it was about 2 weeks because it was during the Chinese New Year in 95. Then in 2005, the two of us decided to go to Thailand and Laos because Banu had worked and studied there. I was confused just a minute ago when I said it was in China, but it was in Thailand and Laos where she had ended up. And my husband said, "Jackie, you need to go to Thailand with her because she has some dyslexia and she always wants to turn right when she should be going left." So he said, so she doesn't get lost. She always had help. The people were always very happy to help her. And so that was an interesting trip. Back in Richardson, the community in the early to mid-90s, we were busy putting displays of various kinds in the public library in Richardson, and things having to do with the United Nations, sometimes things when it was springtime and time to elect the assembly, we would have things in about 3 different display areas on Baha'i elections. And one time we had a display on the United Nations, which had been sent to us from the United Nations. So these were quite nice. We had displays in various booths, one at a city festival and some other festivals that Richardson has had at different times. In the 90s, we made a presentation of the promise of world peace to the various city officials in Richardson. Groups of 2 or 3 would go to the police department, the chief of the fire department, Richardson Independent School District, City Council, all these officials, so that they each got a copy of the promise of world peace and became aware of some of it. Then in the 90s also, there was a direct mailing that was made to Olive Richardson with the help of Russ Juergens from a Baha'i family in Springfield, Illinois, who knew Abdu'l-Baha and who Abdu'l-Baha had revealed a prayer for Russ when he was just a young person. So this was his business of promoting various businesses. So we made sure that this mailing went out to every household in Richardson, and that was followed up by 2 follow-ups. One was in Pierce High School auditorium with music and of various kinds. And the second follow-up was to people that were interested in learning more about the Baha'i faith that was held at, I believe it was the YMCA. One person became a Baha'i from that effort. There were 3 or 4 interested, but there was this one person that became a Baha'i. Russ also helped to initiate an event called International Harmony, which was music, and it was held in front of the city hall around the fountain there between the city, where was the city hall and the library. And we sent out invitations to many different groups, dance groups, music groups, all kinds of groups that might have some international background. And so there were about 8 or 10 different groups that came. And we advertised this and made it well known in Richardson to invite people to just come and listen and enjoy it and be around the fountain there on Arapahoe Road. Okay, I will move on to something that was what was traumatic at one point. This was back in Illinois when I was in high school. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, had been guardian for many years, had appointed many people whose role was to be a hand of the cause, to teach the faith and to also protect the faith from any attacks or misinformation. And Shoghi Effendi had just appointed some over the years, and in 1957 he had just appointed had finished appointing for a total of 27 hands of the cause. Shoghi Effendi and Rahia Khanum had gone to England to hunt for various kinds of ornamentation to go in the various gardens and burial places. And while he was there, he developed the flu and passed away in early November of 1957. This was a totally unexpected happening. It was a very huge test for those who are close to Shoghi Effendi personally and Baha'is all over the world who had learned of the importance of the guardian's station of protecting the faith and helping it develop and grow throughout the world. In Quincy, back in the early part of the 1950s, there had been a Christian minister who had become very interested in the Baha'i faith. He and his wife and his family had studied it, and he encouraged those of his followers to learn about it also. So after studying it for a while and going to many meetings and asking lots of questions and doing reading, in the early 50s, like 52, 53, somewhere in there, he became a Baha'i, and many of his followers became Baha'is also. And they would go to Baha'i things and become a part of the community, and it was very exciting to have a whole group of people to become Baha'is. There was this little nucleus of Baha'is that was already there in the Quincy area, but then all of a sudden you have 25 or 30 people becoming Baha'is at once. So everything was going along very well. The people were really loving and enjoying the faith. And attending various statewide and once in a while the National Baha'i Convention in the end of April, beginning of May. And when Shoghi Effendi died. And this was a hugely surprising and traumatic event for the whole worldwide community. And there was a great deal of studying of the writings done by the hands of the cause about this, all of a sudden, this loss of the guardian. And according to Abdu'l-Baha's will and testament, his son, his living son, with the proper approach to the Baha'i faith, would follow Shoghi Effendi as guardian. And come to find it out, there was no child, no son, daughter, anything. The couple, Ruhiyya Khanum and Shoghi Effendi, had never had children. So the hands of the cause gathered together in the Haifa area, and they studied, and they prayed, and they prayed, and they studied the writings until they were able to learn by careful study of the writings that was what was promised was the guardianship, which is an institution. And up to that point, there had been a physical guardian, but now there was no physical guardian. So the hands of the cause, in their studies, realized and started to educate the Baha'i world about the importance of the guardianship. Shoghi Effendi had written and written and written answers to letters and meeting with Baha'is from all over the world at that time. And so there was a mass of writings of Shoghi Effendi on all kinds of topics. And very slowly, there were conferences called all over the United States, and some of the hands or the auxiliary board members would meet with Baha'is in the area to educate them what was the background of, no living offspring. This was very important, and slowly people began to really gain an understanding and get a foothold on this. But some people really didn't. They could not understand how there could be this very important institution without a head. And there were little groups of people in various places in the world, in France and in the United States, and I'm not sure about in Iran, but these were some of the outstanding places where there was a great deal of disruption. The whole NSA of France was broken up due to discord on this topic. And in Quincy, this group, this large-sized group of people who had been Christian and had become Baha'is in the early 50s were just totally distraught over this whole thing. And it turned out that there was also some damage going on worldwide. Some group of the hands of the cause that had been elected, there were 9 that were at the hands of the cause at the Holy Land, that stayed there at the Holy Land from 1957 until the House of Justice was elected. And they were following things throughout the world at this time. And they could see that, some people that others really relied on were becoming more and more distant from the Baha'i faith as it was without the living guardian. And so they sent out a letter to the world and to the hands of the cause saying that there was no living guardian and that people needed to understand that the guardianship was there and would always be there through the writings of Shoghi Effendi. It turned out that one of the hands of the cause, who was very outstanding, had done an outstanding amount of teaching over the many years that he had been a Baha'i, became convinced that he himself was meant to be guardian. And after much counseling by the hands of the cause in the Holy Land and much patience, there was no movement back toward what the teachings really are by this individual. And so finally in 1960, this hand of the cause, Mason Remy, was declared a covenant breaker. And this meant that people could no longer be around with him or talk to him or correspond with him, because Abdu'l-Baha had been very, very clear in his will and testament that if you have one rotten apple and a bushel of apples, the bushel of apples will not make that one rotten apple good, but the rotten apple will destroy the whole bushel. So this was the understanding that we had to come to, that if we knew anybody that was following Mason Remy would eventually be named a covenant breaker, and Baha'is were not to accept any mailings from these people from Mason Remy, or to associate with these people that were following Mason Remy. For my parents, it was very hard, and for some of the faithful Baha'is, the Quincy assembly members, all 8 of the 9 people on that assembly became covenant breakers. One woman who had been associated with the Baha'is for 20 years and probably knew more about the faith than the rest of them on the assembly was not. She voted against whatever it was. So Quincy Assembly was disbanded, and the rest of the Baha'is that were not covenant breakers remained together and prayed together and did activities together. But the Baha'is had been very closely associated with a race unity group in Quincy from the 1940s on, and were a very active part of this race unity group. And because my parents had been active with that, they didn't understand when my parents stopped coming to these meetings. And there wasn't anything that my parents could do to share with them anything. They just stopped coming. But they continued to invite these African-American people and friends to various race unity picnics and various activities that the Baha'is were holding there in the area. And Mother said eventually the people were able to regain their association with the Baha'is in that area, which was a blessing, really. And when 1963 came and it was time to elect this Universal House of Justice, the body of the Universal House of Justice, a handful of Baha'is from Quincy went to London and were there for the election, and were there when they received word from the World Center who the members of that first Universal House of Justice were. So this was very successful, and the groups of people from scattered around the world just kind of dropped off. It was like the tree of the Baha'i faith had many limbs, but this whole limb of the covenant breakers fell away from the tree and died. So this was a long process, and the founder of this group, Mason Remy, died in the early 2000s, I believe it was. During one's lifetime as a Baha'i, there are many times and periods and circumstances that are really tests your personal faith. And these personal tests have to be dealt with, or it will tend to pull you away from the faith. And the solution that I have had over the years is when I'm being tested by whatever, I go to the Baha'i writings and I try to find something of Abdu'l-Baha's writings or Baha'u'llah's writings about that particular topic, and to read about it and pray about it and try to become strengthened in that area. It's so important to really realize how deep and how wide the topics of the Baha'i teachings are. And we only have a small amount. I think sometimes of all of those untranslated works of Baha'u'llah that will become translated in the future as the Baha'i community grows. So it's important that the children and the young people are able to go to Baha'i children's classes, picnics, activities, and to develop friendships among the Baha'is. This has been a real test of the young people finding or not finding children that become their friends who are Baha'is. And some of the tests in this area have been the language barriers. When the language is not English, kids from American and English-speaking backgrounds, for the most part, don't know other languages. And when large numbers of people from another country or another language are living in one community, it's so important that the young people especially, because the children have to learn English as they're here going to school, so they know the English. And it's also a test for the non-English speaking to, let's talk about something special in our own language that we have originally. And so the English speakers are excluded from that. And so this is a test all over the world, wherever Baha'i pioneers go and have to learn a new language, is to continue that love and that friendship and that feeling of family. To me, the Baha'i community is my second family. We discover new members of our family whenever people move into the area or lose them when they move out of the area. So this is so important to maintain and strengthen the Baha'i communities, is to love and be friends with and realize we are one human family.